Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Genesis chapters 37 through 50 as we engage in our class on Old Testament literature and theology. Our passage starts off, it's going to be about Joseph and his brothers and the hatred that they have for him, Genesis chapter 37. And it begins with a bad report that Joseph has made concerning his brothers. Um, Apparently, they had been acting in an inappropriate manner, and Joseph had told their father about it. And nobody likes to be told on. And so, as a result, that's not going to endear him to them. And then to make matters worse, their father gives Joseph a tunic. It has been translated a few different ways. Is it a coat with sleeves or is it a coat of many colors? What's interesting is that we have from around this time period wall paintings in a tomb in Egypt, the Beni Hassan tomb, located in southern Egypt along the Nile. And it depicts Semitic peoples coming down into Egypt, but they are pictured wearing these multicolored tunics with sleeves. So which is it? Is it the sleeves? Is it of the many colors? The same term though is used later on in Second Samuel to describe some of the children of King David who are also given, this sort of tunic, which apparently indicates leadership. And so Joseph is being singled out, even though he's younger, and usually it's the older children that become the family leaders. But Joseph, who's younger, but who is the firstborn son of Rachel. Remember, Rachel was the beloved; she's dead now. But that was Jacob's favorite, and he's playing favorites here. And now Joseph, the favorite, has some dreams. The first of those dreams is about sheaves. The sheaves of his brothers are bowing down to his sheaf, and again, that's showing leadership. And then he has another dream, and this dream has the sun and the moon and 11 stars, and they can count. There's 12 brothers. And Joseph is one of those 12, and the sun and the moon and 11 stars are bowing down before him. And Joseph tells these dreams to his brothers and to apparently the rest of the family. And Jacob takes a little bit of offense at that. So what does this mean? That I'm going to be bowing down before you as well? I and the his wives. What's going on there? When you see in Revelation chapter 12 a vision of a woman who is clothed in the sun, moon, and 12 stars, you're supposed to remember this dream because it's recycled in the book of Revelation. It's a dream that represents Jacob and his family. It is a dream that represents Israel. So that's repeated here. Now, the brothers remember, the family business is being shepherds, and so the brothers take the sheep because you can't have the sheep eating on somebody's farmland. They'll eat the crops, and people will get very upset about that. So they're looking for different isolated places up and down Canaan. And now Joseph is sent to check up on them with, again, the idea of having another report. Whether it's going to be good or bad, that depends on them. And they see him coming. And so they decide this is our chance. We can kill him. Nobody's looking, nobody's around. They have murder in their hearts. But it's the oldest brother, is Reuben, who comes up with plan B. No, let's not murder him. Instead, let's take him and throw him into a pit. And Reuben has his own reasons for doing that. You see, Reuben, in the earlier chapters, had gotten into bad graces with his father. Remember how his father had not just Rachel and Leah as wives, but also had born children through their servant girls. That had all been part of the family dysfunction. And Reuben, the oldest, had had an affair with one of those servant girls. So technically, his father's, sort of wife, the mother of some of his children. And Reuben had done this, and Jacob had found out about it and had gotten very, very angry. This was just totally improper. And so Reuben is planning secretly. They're going to throw him into the pit, but then I will come along and rescue him, and I'll be seen by Dad as the rescuer, and he won't be upset at me anymore for that nasty thing that I did, but instead I'll be the hero. And so that's his plan. And Joseph is taken and thrown into the pit. And they take the coat away from him, and they take goat's blood and they place it on the coat as if to say, "Look what we found." Now you're gonna have to catch that. However, Reuben is, I don't know, he's away, and Judah now comes up with Plan C because down the road come a group of Midianite traders, a Midianite caravan. And so Judah comes up with the plan, let's not kill him, let's not leave him in the pit, but let's take him out and sell him, and we can make a profit. And they do. And Judah comes up with a plan, and they do that, and Joseph is sold into slavery, and these slavers are going to take him all the way down to Egypt, where he will be sold in Egypt, probably for a little bit of a marked up price, but he'll be sold down in Egypt. As we come to the next chapter, we expect to see Joseph in Egypt, but instead the camera stays on Judah, who had come up with that plan. Oh, and they had indeed brought the coat of many colors, coat with sleeves, whichever it was, back to Jacob. They said, "Look what we found." And of course he recognizes it. And so notice he has been deceived with the blood of a goat. Reminds me of the way that he put on a goat costume to pretend that he was Esau to deceive his own father. And you have to catch the similarity between these deceptions and how it has come back now to haunt him. And he believes that Joseph has been killed. Now, in the interlude, like I said, the camera starts on Judah, and the story opens up here in chapter 38, where Judah takes a Canaanite wife. And a Canaanite wife is going to tend to come with Canaanite culture and Canaanite religion. That's not a good thing. And not only does he take a Canaanite wife, but he now chooses a Canaanite wife for his son. So it looks like they're going to slip away from the worship of the Lord, and eventually, it might not happen in the first generation, but generationally, eventually they will no longer be worshiping the Lord, and now they're going to be worshiping pagan gods, or maybe pagan gods alongside the Lord. It's not a good picture. And so he chooses a Canaanite wife for his son, and they marry, and then that son dies. And so now that widow is taken and given to his next oldest son. That was part of what they called the Levirate custom. Now, it doesn't have anything to do with Levites, but the Levirate custom was this custom where if a woman died who was married to a man, but they had not had any children yet, maybe the marriage hadn't been consummated, or for whatever reason they haven't had children, it was the duty of the next oldest son to come and be with her and have children by her, who would fill in that blank of no children and would provide children from that same family at least. And so they do that, and the next oldest son marries the bride, and he dies. And at this point, Judah says, "Well, there's a younger son, but he's not old enough." And so Tamar, that's the widow's name. Tamar is sent packing back to her own family with a "Don't call us, we'll call you." When he's old enough and time passes, and she isn't called, and she decides to take matters now into her own hands, where she dresses up as though she is a prostitute, and she sets up a booth by the road where she sort of expects Judah to come by. And sure enough, he comes by, and she solicits his trade, and he comes in and he engages in with her, and takes her on as a client. And he agrees, "Well, I'll send they didn't have credit cards or anything like that, but I'm going to give you my ancient equivalent of my credit card and my driver's license, my staff and my signet, and then I'll make sure you get paid after the fact." And so later on, after they are done, he sends somebody back with a payment. A payment would be a small kid from the flock, but she's gone, and along with his staff and his signet ring, and like I said, his driver's license and his credit card. So it doesn't look good. And then he hears that Tamar is pregnant. Now, he hadn't recognized her. Maybe she'd been veiled, at least facially veiled, or maybe it was dark. I don't know why he didn't recognize her, but he didn't. And he hears now that Tamar is pregnant. Oh, Tamar must have been doing something bad. Instead of going to my next son, she ought to be killed for that. She has played the prostitute. Well, she has, but it was with him. And she says, "You're right, I have. And here's the credit card and the driver's license of the person that I did this with. And it's his. And he recognized it. And so he says, okay, that belongs to me. And yes, it was inappropriate what she did, but it was even more inappropriate what I did. And so she has come into the family. She has become pregnant with somebody in the family. It's not outside of the family. And so she will give birth, although he will not again have any sort of sexual relations with her after this. That was a one and only time. And she gives birth to twins. I guess twins were, well, in the family, going back to Jacob and Esau. Remember, they were twins. And so Perez and Zerah are going to come forth from this. Um, and again, there's something a little odd about the order of birth where a hand comes up and then comes back, and then the other one, Perez, actually takes his place. He bursts forth, which the word Perez is to burst forth. We're going to see that term again when we get to 2 Samuel. So just underscore that word Perez, the bursting forth idea, because that's going to have something similar will happen, not with children being born, but when the ark is brought to Jerusalem by David in 2 Samuel. Just remember that term. The next story now we do go back to Joseph, and Joseph has arrived in Egypt, and he is a slave in Egypt, and he is sold to Potiphar, who is captain of the guard, working for the Pharaoh. And Potiphar has a wife who sees Joseph, and Joseph is apparently doing quite well. He is good looking and he acts good, and Potiphar, after a while, raises him to a position of being in charge over all of Potiphar's belongings. And Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, and he will have none of that. He said, "No, that's not appropriate. My master has treated me well. You know, I shouldn't be going and sleeping with his wife." And so, as she is scorned by that, she accuses Joseph of having tried to rape her. And Joseph is taken and thrown into prison. Now, the fact that he's thrown into prison instead of maybe having some key body parts cut off, like his neck or his groin area, makes me wonder if Potiphar didn't really believe her charge. Maybe he knows his wife. I don't know. There is also this idea that the word for officer there, where he's an officer in the court of Pharaoh, that's also a word that's used to describe a eunuch. Now, I'm not saying for sure that Potiphar is a eunuch, but if so, then you can maybe figure out why his wife is looking at other people. Or it might not have anything to do with that. It might just be that he has that title, but it's not necessarily about something that had been cut off from him, that he is just an officer. It could go either way. But Joseph, in any case, is now thrown into prison and becomes not just a slave, but a slave in prison. So here's Joseph in prison, and in prison, while he is there, you have two other prisoners placed into the prison with him, the cupbearer to the Pharaoh, and also the baker to the Pharaoh, two not super important, but somewhat important officials. And Joseph is made a slave to them. So he's not just a slave. He's not just a slave in prison. Now he's a slave in who's been made a slave of other prisoners. There's no lower place to which you can go. But now they have children, or not children, they have dreams, and Joseph hears about their dreams and interprets their dreams. And he says to the cupbearer, "Your dream is a sign that you're going to be free and in 3 days," and he is freed in 3 days. And the baker's dream is taken and interpreted by Joseph. You're going to be freed rather permanently, your head from your body. He's going to be taken and killed, and in 3 days, and he will be. And so he says to the cupbearer, "Remember me because the baker remembering him isn't going to do anything. But he says to the cupbearer, "Remember me when you get your freedom." And the cupbearer says, "Sure, I'll remember you," and then forgets completely about it. Let me just say, sometimes people will say to me, "Can you remember to pray for me?" And I know my memory, even when I was younger. And so my typical response is, "Let's pray now. Let's do that right now before I forget," because I don't want to forget that sort of thing. So we have Joseph enslavement, but now the Pharaoh is going to have a dream, and his dream will cause Joseph to be remembered by the cupbearer. So the Pharaoh has dreams. The first of these involve fat cows coming out of the Nile and skinny cows coming out of the Nile and eating the fat cows. Now, I've sailed down the Nile and I've seen some skinny cows right there by the Nile. I've never seen any fat cows by the Nile, but I've seen a little bit of this, and that's just a weird dream. And then he has a second dream where there are fat ears of corn, and they come up and then they are eaten by skinny ears of corn. The Egyptians, I'm told, actually had books of dreams. And if you had a dream, you would go look it up in the book and it would give you the interpretation. If you had a dream that, somebody wasn't very nice, then here's what it might mean. Uh, and apparently the wise men go to look it up and there's just nothing like this. These are just strange dreams. And so they are helpless, but their helplessness now causes the cupbearer to remember Joseph, and he tells the Pharaoh about Joseph, and they fetch Joseph, and he gets cleaned up, and he comes before the Pharaoh, and he hears the dreams, and he tells the Pharaoh the meaning of these dreams. In both cases, it's the same meaning, that there are 7 good years, just like there had been 7 fat cows and 7 ears of fat corn. There are 7 good years, and they're in those 7 years right now. They're having great, things are going great in Egypt where the crops are just growing like wildfire. It's great, but that will be followed by 7 years of famine. And famines didn't happen a lot in Egypt, but they could happen. We actually have records of famines happening, even to the point of 7-year famines. I don't think it's necessarily a reference when there's actually a stela that talks about a 7-year famine. I don't think it's talking about this one. It doesn't really fit the chronology, and that tells me it probably happens a number of times, not all the time, but on occasion. And so that's going to be followed by 7 years of famine. And Joseph also comes up with a plan, not just the problem, but the plan on how to mitigate the problem. You're in those 7 good years, so store up grain. You've got plenty of you have plenty of produce. There's a surplus. Take that surplus and store it up for those 7 years of famine, so that you will be ready to face them. And that's his plan. And Pharaoh hears the plan and he says, "That's a great plan. I'm going to have you be the one that carries it out." And Joseph is elevated to be the VIP, the number 2 man in all of Egypt. So that's Joseph before Pharaoh, this plan to save Egypt. Next, the famine as it finally takes place. And Joseph has everything in hand, and he's seen for the needs of Egypt. But the famine is bigger than just Egypt. It impacts Canaan as well, and I'm assuming other places too. And so the brothers hear that there is food to be had in Egypt, and so Jacob sends them, the older brothers, but he keeps, of course, Joseph is lost to him. He thinks Joseph is dead, and he keeps Benjamin behind as well, Joseph's younger full brother, the other son of Rachel. So the brothers now come to Egypt, and Joseph recognizes them. He just happens to be when these foreigners come. Maybe he would check them all out. I'm not sure what process he would take, but he accuses them of being spies, and then he takes one and they're saying, "No, no, we're all brothers. We have a father back in Canaan." One of them is taken. Simeon is taken and kept, and the other 9 are released. Remember, you've got Joseph and Benjamin. That's 11 and 12, and then Simeon is in prison. So the others are released, and they go back home, and he says, "You can go home, fetch your younger brother that you claim that you have, bring him back, and that will make that it will corroborate your story, and we will be able to tell your story is true, and then you can all, go home. But until then, you're under suspicion. And so Simeon has to remain behind as a hostage, and they go back home. They return to Canaan, and they explain to Jacob what's happening. And Jacob's not having any of it. He'd rather lose Simeon than risk Benjamin. Now think about that. He's willing to leave one of his sons in prison for life in order to protect Benjamin. This favoritism is continuing. But finally, the famine gets worse and worse and worse. And so, in desperation, they say, look, we can all starve to death, or we can risk Benjamin and we can go back. And so, finally, he relents, and they go back with Benjamin and the brothers, and they come before Pharaoh, not before Pharaoh, before Joseph. And Joseph receives them and gives them not just the alliance of suspicion. He releases Simeon and then invites them all to dinner in a very formal banquet. Now, a formal banquet means that they don't get to sit with Joseph. He sits at his table and they sit at their table, but they have been arranged by Joseph's people, so they're in order of their age, and they hadn't given their age, and that's not easy to necessarily tell. Which is the older and which is the younger, and so on. I mean, they can probably tell it with Benjamin. He's very young. Um, but they're given this reception, and Benjamin is given the chief portions at the meal. He is treated like the royal honored guest. So now they are released with the grain that will see them through the famine. But Joseph's cup, his silver cup, is placed in the bag of Benjamin, unbeknownst to Benjamin or the brothers. And he lets them go, and they don't get very far, where he sends officers to go and grab them and to search the cups. Remember how Laban had come searching for his gods, his teraphim? And of course, Rachel had actually stolen them, so she was guilty. Here's Benjamin. Benjamin's not guilty, but they search the bags, and lo and behold, it is found in Benjamin's bag. And and the officers say, Benjamin has to come back with us. He will be a slave of Joseph, but the rest of you can go home. And all they have to do is do what they've been told, take their grain, go home, and they don't have to make up any lies. They can tell the truth. And Benjamin will be gone. They will have gotten rid of Benjamin just like they got rid of Joseph, and things will have worked in their favor. And it's at this point that Judah gets up and he says, no, take me instead. Judah, who had come up with a plan to sell Joseph into slavery. All he has to do is walk away, and Benjamin will spend the rest of his life in slavery too. But Judah, no, take me instead. And it's a beautiful picture of how Jesus is going to come. The Lion of the tribe of Judah will one day arise, and he will go to the cross saying, take me instead. And so the brothers, Judah in particular, have passed the test of love for their brother Benjamin. And now Joseph reveals himself. And this is the climactic whole point. This is the pivotal point in the entire story. And so after this, the family Joseph has revealed himself and has explained what's happened. And now the invitation for the entire family will be for them all to come to Egypt. And of course, they have to they told Jacob the good news: Joseph is still alive. Benjamin is okay. Everyone's okay. And so they come back all now to Egypt. And there's a scene there, not just a handful of verses, where Joseph comes before Pharaoh with a plan to resettle Egypt. Remember, he's not the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh is the Pharaoh. But Joseph comes up with a plan to allow this small tribe of Israelites to settle, and they will settle on a place called Goshen on the east side of the Nile Delta. That sort of swamp area. If you live in South Florida, it's like a little bit like the Everglades. Not the greatest piece of property, but it will do very nicely for the Israelites and to shepherd their sheep, which is not a profession that the Egyptians really care for. That's considered by them sort of lower class. So keep them on the outskirts. It's a good place for them. Next, we read about the situation in Egypt, not with the Israelites, but with the Egyptians themselves, who have come to purchase grain from Egypt for their livelihood, and after a while they're running out of money and gold and valuables, and so they next offer their land to the Pharaoh, and that goes to the Pharaoh. And then when they're done with that, and there's still more famine, and they need even more grain, now they sell themselves basically into a slavery. So it's interesting where we had Joseph's enslavement in Egypt back in chapter 39 and 40. Now here in chapter 47, we have his enslavement of the Egyptians. And of course, we know how the next book is going to end up with the Israelites being enslaved, but now it's the Egyptians who are enslaved. And then toward the end of his life, we have Jacob before he dies, and he's going to die right at the end. But before he does, he gives a blessing to each of his sons. And in particular, when the blessing comes to Judah, he speaks about how the scepter will not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes. Shiloh sounds a lot like shalom, until peace comes. So is it talking about the place? There's going to be a place called Shiloh too. Um, but there's something special about the scepter and Judah, where Judah signified as the future leader. He'd already been a natural leader, but there will come a time where the descendant of Judah will be the king over all of Israel. But notice how we had interlude, both involving Judah. And we come to the last couple of chapters where Jacob now dies. And after the death of Jacob, the brothers of Joseph are beginning to get very worried. He hasn't taken out any vengeance upon them, but that's maybe because Jacob was alive, and now that he's dead, all the constraints they fear are off. And so they send a message to him, are we in trouble? Are you going to take us out now? And Genesis chapter 50, verses 19 and 20 give us, I think, perhaps the key verse in the Joseph story, where Joseph answers their requests. And Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, and they did, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. And the book is going to end. Now, that's not the very last verse. Last verse is where Joseph dies, and he's going to solicit a promise from them for when he dies, they're to take his bones with them back to Canaan, where he might be finally buried in Canaan, in keeping with the promise that Canaan is the promised land. But this verse actually explains the Joseph story, and maybe explains not just the Joseph story, but explains the Exodus event, on how God was setting them up already with some evil things, and yet it would lead to a good result. And sometimes people ask about, well, the whole story of the Bible. It begins with a fall into sin and being cast out of the garden. And here again, we have the echo that God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. That even in the midst of a bad thing like the fall into sin that Genesis had already talked about, that there is something positive to be brought out, not just positive, a greater good that would come forth as a result of that, the salvation of all of God's people. So notice God's purpose is about this present result, but it's also to preserve many people alive. There is a resulting promise, but also a salvation promise that applied to them in the natural sense, but to us in the spiritual sense. Because this is our story too. Yes, bad things happen in this world, but it is working together by God to bring about this present and future result for us, that we might be saved.